In the arms of a hitman. Alessia DeSantis had never believed in love, not in their world. But when her father was murdered, when she was forced into a marriage that felt more like a sentence than a choice, she realized something brutal. This was not a wedding. This was a cage. Marcello Ricci smirked, his fingers ghosting over her pulse. "You need a husband," he murmured. "And lucky for you, I've always liked breaking pretty things." Chapter 1. The Shadow of a Fallen Empire. The scent of lilies, heavy and cloying, filled the air, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood that Alessia DeSantis could still taste on her tongue, though she'd scrub her hands raw. The Grand Cathedral, usually a sanctuary of soaring arches and stained glass saints, felt like a mausoleum tonight. Her father's mausoleum. Don Antonio DeSantis, the Lion of Palermo, lay in a mahogany casket, his face composed, almost serene, betraying none of the violence that had ripped him from this world, from her. Alessia, dressed in a black lace dress that felt more like a shroud, knelt beside the casket, her fingers tracing the cold, polished wood. The rhythmic chanting of the priests, the hushed whispers of the mourners, the shuffling feet, it all faded into a dull roar in her ears. Only the hollowness in her chest, a gaping void where her father's booming laughter used to reside, felt real. She remembered his hands, large and calloused, yet capable of such surprising gentleness when he'd braided her hair as a child. She remembered his eyes, the same shade of deep, stormy gray as her own, always twinkling with mischief, even when he was delivering a stern reprimand. He taught her to ride, to shoot, to read the subtle shifts in a man's posture that betrayed his true intentions. He taught her to survive in this world, a world ruled by ancient codes and brutal power plays. But he hadn't taught her how to live without him. A shadow fell over her, and Alessia stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for the small, silver pistol she'd tucked into the folds of her skirt, a habit her father had drilled into her since she was old enough to hold it. It was a foolish gesture, of course. No one would dare attack her here. Not tonight. Not in this sacred space, surrounded by the watchful eyes of the DeSantis family cappy. "Alessia." The voice was low, smooth as aged whiskey, and it sent a shiver of unease down her spine. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Marcello Ricci, the Viper of Venice, her father's associate. And now, if the rumors were true, her future husband. Alessia slowly rose, turning to face him. Marcello was a study in contrasts. His suit was impeccably tailored, the dark fabric accentuating his lean, powerful build. His face was classically handsome, with sharp cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes that were the color of polished obsidian. Eyes that held no warmth, only a cold, calculating intelligence. He was younger than her father, perhaps by a decade, but he carried himself with an air of authority that belied his years. He exuded a dangerous charisma, a predatory grace that made her skin crawl. "My condolences, Alessia," Marcello said, his voice devoid of any genuine emotion. He offered her his hand, a gesture of supposed comfort, but Alessia saw it for what it was, a claim. She ignored his outstretched hand, her gaze unwavering. "What do you want, Marcello?" A faint smile played on his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "To pay my respects to Don Antonio, of course. And to discuss the future." "The future?" Alessia repeated, her voice laced with ice. "There is no future. Not without my father." Marcello's smile widened, a chillingly predatory expression. "On the contrary, Alessia, your future is just beginning, and it is inextricably tied to mine." He gestured towards a group of men standing in the shadows near the entrance of the cathedral. Alessia recognized them instantly. The cappy of the Ricci family, their faces grim, their eyes watchful. They were here to ensure that the arrangement proceeded as planned. The arrangement. That's what they called it. A merger of two powerful families, a strategic alliance forged in the wake of her father's death. But Alessia knew the truth. It was a takeover, a hostile acquisition, and she was the prize. Her father had always warned her about Marcello. "He's a snake, Alessia, he'd said, his voice rough with concern. Charming, yes, but utterly ruthless. He covets power, and he'll stop at nothing to get it. She hadn't wanted to believe him. She'd seen the way Marcelo looked at her, the possessive glint in his eyes, and a foolish part of her, a part that yearned for something more than the cold, lonely existence she'd always known, had dared to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be something real between them. Now, standing in the shadow of her father's casket, surrounded by the men who had orchestrated his death, she knew how wrong she'd been. "I will never marry you," Alessia said, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "I would rather die." Marcelo chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent another wave of unease through her. "Such spirit. I admire that, Alessia. But you have no choice. The agreement is made. The vows will be exchanged." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You need a husband, a protector. Someone to guide you through these turbulent times." His fingers, surprisingly gentle, traced the curve of her jawline. "And lucky for you, I've always liked breaking pretty things." Alessia flinched, but she didn't back down. She met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You may break my body, Marcelo, but you will never break my spirit." He withdrew his hand, his expression hardening. "We shall see, Alessia. We shall see." He turned to the Cappy, a silent command passing between them. They moved forward, flanking Alessia, their presence a tangible threat. The chanting of the priests grew louder, the scent of lilies more overpowering. Alessia felt a wave of dizziness, a sense of unreality. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be her life. As Marcelo led her away from her father's casket, towards the waiting car that would take her to her gilded cage, Alessia closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She whispered a silent vow, a promise to her father, to herself. She would survive. She would find a way to avenge his death. And she would make Marcelo Ricci pay for everything he had taken from her, even if it was the last thing she did. She knew this was only the beginning, and the start to a path filled with uncertainty. Chapter 2. An arranged fate, a binding oath. The drive to the Ricci estate was a blur. Alessia sat in the back of the black limousine, staring out the window at the passing city lights, her mind numb with grief and fear. The Cappy who had escorted her from the cathedral sat on either side of her, silent and watchful, their presence a constant reminder of her captivity. The Ricci estate, a sprawling villa perched on a hilltop overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea, was a stark contrast to the DeSantis family home, a centuries-old palazzo in the heart of Palermo. Where the DeSantis home was filled with history, with the echoes of generations past, the Ricci villa was all modern opulence, a testament to Marcelo's newfound wealth and power. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it lacked soul, warmth. It felt cold, sterile, just like its owner. As the car pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates, Alessia felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This was it. There was no turning back. She was entering the serpent's lair, and she had no idea if she would ever escape. Marcelo was waiting for her at the entrance, his expression unreadable. He offered her his arm, a mockery of chivalry. Alessia ignored it, stepping out of the car on her own, her head held high. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. "Welcome to your new home, Alessia," Marcelo said, his voice smooth and devoid of any warmth. "It's not my home," Alessia retorted, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "It's a prison." Marcelo's lips curved into a faint smile. "Call it what you will. It is where you will stay, where you will obey." He led her through the grand entrance hall, a vast space with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with modern art that Alessia found cold and uninspired. Servants, their faces carefully blank, bowed as they passed, their eyes averted. Alessia felt their unspoken pity, their fear of their master. It only reinforced her sense of isolation. Marcelo showed her to her room, a lavishly decorated suite with a balcony overlooking the sea. It was larger than her entire apartment back in Palermo, but it felt like a cage nonetheless. The silk sheets, the antique furniture, the fresh flowers, it was all a display of wealth, of power, but it held no comfort for her. "The wedding will be tomorrow," Marcello said, his voice matter-of-fact. "A small, private ceremony. Just the families and a few close associates." Alessia stared at him, her mind reeling. Tomorrow? She had expected more time to plan, to find a way out. But Marcello was clearly not going to give her any leeway. He wanted to bind her to him as quickly as possible before she could find a way to resist. "I will not go through with it," Alessia said, her voice shaking with defiance. "I will not marry you." Marcello sighed, as if dealing with a recalcitrant child. "You have no choice, Alessia. The agreement is made. Your father's signature is on the contract. My signature is on the contract. And tomorrow, your signature will be on it as well." He pulled a document from his inside pocket, a thick, legal-looking contract. Alessia recognized it instantly. It was the marriage contract, the one her father had reluctantly agreed to, under duress. She was sure. She'd seen him sign it, his face pale and drawn, his hand trembling. He'd known he was signing her life away, but he believed he had no other choice. He believed he was protecting her. "My father was murdered," Alessia said, her voice choked with emotion. "You think I will honor an agreement made with his killers?" Marcello's expression hardened. "Your father's death was unfortunate, but it changes nothing. The families must be united. It is the only way to ensure peace, to prevent further bloodshed." "Peace?" Alessia scoffed. "You call this peace? This is a conquest, Marcello. You're taking everything from me, my family, my freedom, my life." He stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. "You will learn to accept your fate, Alessia. And you will learn to obey me. I am your husband now, your master. You will do as I say." Alessia met his gaze, her own eyes filled with hatred. "I will never be your puppet, Marcello. I will fight you every step of the way." He chuckled a low, menacing sound. "I look forward to it, Cara. I do enjoy a challenge." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day. And you wouldn't want to disappoint your new husband, would you?" He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like the closing of a prison cell. Alessia stood there for a long moment, her body trembling with rage and despair. She looked around the opulent room, at the symbols of her captivity, and a wave of nausea washed over her. She ran to the balcony, gasping for air, the cool sea breeze a small comfort against the burning fire in her chest. She looked out at the vast expanse of the sea, at the twinkling lights of the distant city, and a sense of overwhelming loneliness washed over her. She was alone, trapped, with no one to turn to. But as she stood there, staring into the darkness, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She was a DeSantis. She was her father's daughter. She would not be broken. She would not surrender. She would find a way to survive, to fight back, to reclaim her life. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She would play Marcello's game for now. She would pretend to be the obedient wife, the docile captive. But she would be watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. She would learn his secrets, exploit his weaknesses, and she would make him pay for everything he had done. The vow she had made at her father's casket echoed in her mind, a solemn promise that she would not break. She would honor her father's memory, and she would avenge his death, even if it cost her everything. The sea breeze whispered secrets, carrying the scent of salt and a promise of the storm to come. Alessia knew that the coming days would test her strength and the binding oath that felt like a shackle around her heart. But she would endure. Chapter 3. Whispers of Rebellion in Gilded Cages. The morning of the wedding dawned gray and overcast, the sky mirroring Alessia's mood. She had barely slept, tossing and turning in the unfamiliar bed, her mind racing with desperate plans, each one more improbable than the last. Escape was impossible. The villa was heavily guarded, every door and window monitored. She was trapped, a bird in a gilded cage. A maid, a young woman with downcast eyes and a timid demeanor, brought her a breakfast tray, fresh fruit, pastries, strong coffee. Alessia picked at the food, her stomach churning with anxiety. She had no appetite, only a gnawing sense of dread. The maid, whose name was Sophia, lingered, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the tray. "Signora," she whispered, glancing nervously towards the door, "is there anything else you need?" Alessia looked at her, sensing a flicker of sympathy in the young woman's eyes. Perhaps she wasn't entirely alone in this gilded prison. "What is it like here, Sophia?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Working for Signor Ricci?" Sophia's eyes widened, fear flickering in their depths. He is a demanding master, Signora. But he can also be generous. To those who are loyal. And what happens to those who are not? Alessia pressed, her gaze unwavering. Sophia hesitated, her lower lip trembling. "It is best not to speak of such things, Signora. Please, be careful." Alessia nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. Sophia was afraid, but she had offered a glimpse of hope, a hint that not everyone in the Ricci household was blindly devoted to their master. It was a small crack in the wall of her captivity, but it was enough to fuel her determination. Sophia left, and Alessia forced herself to eat, knowing she needed to keep up her strength. She had to be prepared for whatever the day might bring. Later, a different maid, older and more severe, arrived with a dress. It was a masterpiece of white silk and lace, a traditional Sicilian wedding gown, passed down through generations of Ricci brides. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but Alessia felt a wave of revulsion as she looked at it. It was a symbol of her subjugation, a visual representation of the chains that bound her to Marcello. She refused to let the maid help her dress, preferring to struggle with the intricate lacings and buttons herself. It was a small act of defiance, but it gave her a sense of control, however fleeting. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The white dress, the elaborate hairstyle, the carefully applied makeup, it was all a facade, a mask designed to hide the fear and anger that churned beneath the surface. She looked like a bride, but she felt like a prisoner. A knock on the door startled her. "Alessia," Marcello's voice called out, "it is time." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. She opened the door, her head held high, her expression carefully neutral. Marcello stood there, resplendent in a dark suit, his eyes gleaming with a possessive light. He offered her his arm, a smirk playing on his lips. "You look beautiful, Cara," he said, his voice laced with a hint of mockery. Alessia ignored his compliment, refusing to take his arm. She walked beside him, her back straight, her gaze fixed ahead. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The ceremony was held in a small chapel on the estate grounds, a beautiful, intimate space filled with the scent of incense and flowers. The guests, a mix of Ricci and DeSantis family members, watched in silence as Alessia walked down the aisle, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw familiar faces in the crowd, her cousins, her uncles, their expressions a mixture of pity and disapproval. They knew she was being forced into this marriage, but they were powerless to stop it. The code of the Famiglia demanded obedience, loyalty. And Alessia, despite her rebellious spirit, was still bound by that code. The priest began the ceremony, his voice intoning the ancient Latin words. Alessia felt a sense of unreality, as if she were watching the scene unfold from a distance. It was all happening so fast, too fast. When the time came for the vows, Alessia hesitated. She looked at Marcello, his eyes burning into hers, daring her to defy him. She opened her mouth to refuse, to scream her defiance to the heavens, but the words caught in her throat. She thought of her father, of his sacrifice, of the legacy he had entrusted to her. She thought of the DeSantis family, of their pride, their honor. She couldn't bring further shame upon them. She couldn't risk more bloodshed. With a heavy heart, she spoke the words, her voice barely a whisper. "I do." The words felt like a betrayal, a surrender. But they were also a strategic maneuver. She was playing the long game. She would bide her time, gather her strength, and wait for the opportune moment to strike back. Marcelo's grip tightened on hers as he repeated his vows, his voice ringing with triumph. The rings were exchanged, a gold band for him, a diamond-encrusted one for her, another symbol of her captivity. The deal was sealed. As the guests congratulated them, offering forced smiles and empty platitudes, Alessia felt a growing sense of isolation. She was surrounded by people, but she was utterly alone. She caught the eye of her Uncle Marco, her father's younger brother, a man known for his hot temper and his unwavering loyalty to the DeSantis family. He looked at her, his expression filled with a mixture of sadness and something else. Was it understanding? Or perhaps a spark of rebellion? He gave her a subtle nod, almost imperceptible. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to give her a glimmer of hope. She wasn't entirely alone. There were others who questioned Marcelo's rule, who yearned for a return to the old ways, to the honor and integrity of the DeSantis family. The reception was a lavish affair, with endless courses of food, flowing wine, and music that grated on Alessia's nerves. She forced herself to smile, to make polite conversation, to play the role of the happy bride. But inside, she was seething with anger and resentment. Whispers traveled around the edges of the celebration. The name DeSantis brought with it awe and respect. Alessia moved through the guests, and she caught fragments of conversation. Such a shame. She was so close to her father. Marcelo is a lucky man. Do you think it was really the Calabrians? Alessia will bend. They all do in the end. These small whispers created a knot in her stomach. As the evening wore on, Alessia found herself drawn to the edges of the celebration, seeking refuge from the suffocating atmosphere. She found a small balcony overlooking the sea, the same view as her room, but this time, the vastness of the ocean felt less like a symbol of her isolation and more like a promise of escape. She leaned against the railing, breathing in the cool night air, her mind racing. She had to find a way to contact her Uncle Marco, to learn more about his subtle gesture of support. She had to find allies, build a network of resistance within the Ricci household. She had to find a way to fight back. A plan, dangerous and uncertain, began to form in her mind, a whisper of rebellion against the gilded cage that held her captive. The night held its breath, and Alessia knew that her fight had just begun. Chapter 4. The Serpent's Smile, a Promise of Pain. The first few weeks of Alessia's marriage were a carefully choreographed dance of deception. She played the part of the dutiful wife, attending to Marcelo's needs, accompanying him to social events, and enduring his possessive displays of affection in public. In private, however, she maintained a cool distance, her eyes guarded, her words carefully chosen. Marcelo, for his part, seemed to enjoy the game. He was a predator who relished the chase, the challenge of taming his wild captive. He showered her with gifts, jewelry, designer clothes, a sleek sports car, but Alessia accepted them with a polite indifference, refusing to be swayed by his material offerings. He tried to break her, to force her to submit to his will. He would test her patience, push her boundaries, his words laced with veiled threats and subtle insults. He would watch her, his obsidian eyes gleaming with a predatory intensity, waiting for her to crack, to show a sign of weakness. But Alessia refused to give him the satisfaction. She had learned to control her emotions, to mask her true feelings behind a facade of cool composure. She had learned to survive in a world of vipers, and she would not be devoured. One evening, Marcelo hosted a dinner party for some of his business associates, men from various families across Italy and beyond. Alessia, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown that Marcelo had chosen for her, played the role of the gracious hostess, charming the guests with her wit and intelligence. She noticed, however, that the conversation, while ostensibly about legitimate business ventures, was peppered with coded references to more illicit activities, smuggling, money laundering, and the ever-present threat of rival families. She listened carefully, storing away every detail, every nuance, in her memory. Information was power, and she was determined to gather as much of it as she could. As the evening progressed, Marcelo grew increasingly drunk, his behavior more boorish, his touch more possessive. He draped his arm around Alessia's waist, pulling her close, his breath hot against her ear. "You are a beautiful ornament, Kara," he slurred, his voice thick with wine. "A perfect trophy wife. But you are mine, remember that. You belong to me." Alessia stiffened, her disgust barely concealed. She forced a smile, her voice calm and even. "Of course, Marcello. I am yours." Her words were a lie, a calculated deception. She would never belong to him. She would never be his trophy. She was biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Later that night, after the guests had departed, Marcello cornered Alessia in their bedroom. He was drunk, his eyes bloodshot, his movements clumsy. "You think you are so clever, don't you?" he snarled, grabbing her arm, his grip painful. "You think you can fool me with your little games, your polite smiles, your feigned obedience." Alessia met his gaze, her own eyes filled with defiance. "I am your wife, Marcello. I am simply fulfilling my duties." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You are nothing but a pawn, Alessia. A tool to be used. You have no power, no say in anything. You are mine to control." He pushed her towards the bed, his intentions clear. Alessia struggled, her fear rising, but he was stronger than her, his weight pinning her down. "Let me go, Marcello," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Don't do this." He ignored her pleas, his hands roaming over her body, his touch rough and unwelcome. Alessia closed her eyes, tears of frustration and anger welling up. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear, of hearing her cry out. But as he fumbled with the buttons of her dress, a sudden surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. She would not be violated. She would not be broken. She brought her knee up sharply, connecting with his groin. Marcello gasped, his grip loosening, his body momentarily paralyzed with pain. Alessia seized the opportunity, shoving him away with all her strength. She scrambled off the bed, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcello, recovering from the blow, lunged at her, his face contorted with rage. "You bitch," he roared. "You dare defy me?" Alessia dodged his attack, grabbing a heavy glass vase from a nearby table. She held it up, her hand trembling, but her eyes resolute. "Stay away from me, Marcello," she warned, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. "I will not hesitate to defend myself." Marcello stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and something else. Was it respect? Or perhaps a flicker of fear? He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the vase in her hand. He knew she was capable of violence. He had seen it in her eyes, in the set of her jaw. He had underestimated her, and he was starting to realize that his wild captive was not so easily tamed. He backed down, his hands raised in a gesture of mock surrender. "Very well, Alessia," he said, his voice still laced with anger, but his tone more subdued. "You have made your point, but do not think you have won. This is not over." He turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Alessia stood there, her body trembling, the vase still clutched in her hand. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. She knew that Marcello would retaliate, that he would find another way to punish her for her defiance. But she was prepared. She would not be caught off guard again. She had tasted freedom, however briefly, and she would not relinquish it. She would continue to fight, to resist, to plot her revenge. She would make Marcello Ricci pay for everything he had done to her family. And she would not rest until she had achieved her goal. The serpent's smile had promised pain, but Alessia was determined to turn that pain back onto him, tenfold. The night air held a chill, but Alessia felt a burning fire within, a resolve that would not be extinguished. Chapter 5. Echoes of Loss in Empty Halls. The days following the confrontation with Marcello were tense. He avoided her, his presence in the villa a suffocating shadow, his anger a palpable force. Alessia, in turn, retreated further into herself, spending hours wandering the vast, empty halls of the Ricci estate, her mind consumed by memories of her father and plans for revenge. The villa, despite its opulence, felt like a mausoleum, filled with echoes of the past, whispers of lives lived and lost. Alessia found herself drawn to the library, a vast room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with ancient tomes and leather-bound volumes. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could escape the suffocating presence of Marcello and lose herself in the world of words. One afternoon, while browsing the shelves, she stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a row of books. Her heart quickened with anticipation. What secrets did this hidden space conceal? She carefully opened the compartment, revealing a small, wooden box. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs, letters, and documents. They were relics of the Ricci family's past, a history that stretched back centuries. Alessia spent hours poring over the contents of the box, piecing together the story of the Ricci family, their rise to power, their alliances, their betrayals. She learned of their long-standing feud with the Calabrian families, a conflict that had spanned generations, claiming countless lives. She learned of Marcello's father, a ruthless and ambitious man who had built the Ricci Empire on a foundation of blood and violence. And she learned of Marcello's mother, Isabella, a beautiful and gentle woman who had died young, under mysterious circumstances. There were whispers, rumors of foul play, but nothing concrete. Alessia sensed a hidden tragedy, a story that had been carefully buried, concealed by the Ricci family's veil of secrecy. As she delved deeper into the Ricci family history, Alessia began to understand Marcello's ruthlessness, his obsession with power. He was a product of his environment, a reflection of his father's ambition and his mother's tragic fate. He was a damaged soul, twisted by the weight of his family's legacy. But understanding did not equate to forgiveness. Alessia could not excuse his cruelty, his violence, his betrayal of her father. She still held him responsible for her father's death, and she would not rest until she had avenged him. One evening, while exploring the villa's gardens, Alessia discovered a small, secluded chapel hidden amongst the overgrown foliage. It was a beautiful, peaceful space, filled with the scent of jasmine and roses. She entered the chapel, her heart heavy with grief. She knelt before the altar, her eyes closing, tears streaming down her cheeks. She hadn't prayed since her father's death, her faith shattered by the violence that had ripped her world apart. But in this quiet sanctuary, she found a flicker of solace, a sense of connection to something greater than herself. She spoke to her father, her voice a whispered plea. "Papa," she murmured, "I miss you so much. I feel so lost, so alone. Give me strength, guide me. Help me find a way to avenge your death, to bring justice to your killers." As she prayed, she felt a sense of peace settle over her, a calming presence that eased her troubled heart. She didn't know if it was her father's spirit, or simply her own inner strength resurfacing, but it gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She left the chapel, her resolve strengthened. She would not be defeated. She would not surrender. She would continue to fight, to uncover the truth, to seek justice for her father. She returned to the villa, her mind racing with plans. She needed to find allies, people she could trust, within the Ricci household and beyond. She needed to gather evidence, proof of Marcello's crimes. And she needed to find a way to contact her uncle Marco, to enlist his support in her quest for revenge. She knew the risks were enormous. If Marcello discovered her plans, he would not hesitate to kill her. But she was prepared to die if necessary. She would rather die fighting for justice than live a life of subjugation and fear. As she walked through the empty halls, the echoes of the past seemed to whisper encouragement, urging her forward. She was not alone. She had the spirit of her father, the memory of her mother, and the hope of a future free from Marcello's tyranny to guide her. The empty halls, once a symbol of her isolation, now felt like a battleground, a place where she would wage her war against the man who had stolen her life. And she was ready to fight. The echoes of loss fueled her determination, and Alessia knew that she was walking a path towards either redemption or ruin. But she would walk it with her head held high. Chapter 6. A dance of defiance, a glimmer of hope. Alessia began to implement her plan, moving cautiously, like a chess player carefully positioning her pieces. She started by cultivating relationships with the household staff, using her natural charm and empathy to win their trust. She learned their names, their stories, their grievances. She discovered that many of them, despite their outward loyalty to Marcello, harbored secret resentments, fears, and a longing for a different life. Sophia, the young maid who had served her breakfast on her wedding day, became a key ally. Sophia was timid, but she was also observant, and she had access to information that Alessia desperately needed. Sophia overheard conversations, witnessed private meetings, and she discreetly shared her observations with Alessia, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. Alessia also focused on building a relationship with Donatella, Marcello's elderly aunt, who lived in a separate wing of the villa. Donatella was a recluse, a woman who had retreated from the world after the death of her husband many years ago. She was considered eccentric, a harmless old woman who spent her days tending to her garden and reading poetry. But Alessia sensed that Donatella was more than she appeared. She saw a flicker of intelligence in the old woman's eyes, a hint of sadness, and a deep-seated resentment towards her nephew. Alessia began to visit Donatella regularly, bringing her flowers from the garden, sharing stories, and listening patiently to the old woman's rambling reminiscences. She learned that Donatella had been close to Marcello's mother, Isabella, and that she had always suspected foul play in her death. Marcello was a difficult child. Donatella confided one afternoon, her voice a frail whisper. Always angry, always demanding. He inherited his father's ruthlessness, but not his charm. Isabella, she tried to soften him, to teach him compassion. But it was no use. He was his father's son. Donatella's words confirmed Alessia's suspicions. Marcello's cruelty was not simply a product of his upbringing, it was deeply ingrained in his nature. He was a dangerous man, a predator who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. Alessia also began to subtly probe the Capi and other members of Marcello's inner circle, using her position as his wife to gain access to their conversations, their meetings, their secrets. She learned about their business dealings, their rivalries, their vulnerabilities. She gathered information like a spider spinning a web, patiently waiting for the right moment to ensnare her prey. One evening, Marcello hosted a lavish party for his associates, a gathering of the most powerful families in Sicily. Alessia, dressed in a stunning crimson gown, played the role of the perfect hostess, charming the guests, engaging in witty banter, and carefully observing the dynamics between the various factions. She noticed that her uncle Marco was present, his expression guarded, his eyes constantly scanning the room. She knew she had to find a way to speak to him, to convey her message without arousing Marcello's suspicion. She waited for the opportune moment, and as the evening progressed, she found herself standing next to Marco on the balcony, overlooking the moonlit sea. "Uncle Marco," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I need to speak to you. It's about my father." Marco's eyes narrowed, his expression wary. "Be careful, Alessia," he warned. "Marcello's eyes are everywhere." "I know," Alessia replied. "But I have information. I know who killed my father. And I need your help." Marco's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Meet me tomorrow," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "At the old church in San Domenico. At noon." Alessia nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was her chance. She had to make it count. The next day, Alessia made an excuse to Marcello, claiming she needed to visit a dressmaker in Palermo. He was suspicious, his eyes narrowed, but he reluctantly agreed, assigning 2 of his Capi to accompany her. Alessia knew she had to be clever. She couldn't simply slip away from her guards. She had to create a diversion. She instructed the driver to stop at a bustling market, claiming she wanted to buy some fresh fruit. As she strolled through the crowded stalls, she accidentally bumped into a fruit vendor, sending a cascade of oranges and lemons tumbling to the ground. The Cappy, distracted by the commotion, rushed to help her, their attention momentarily diverted. Alessia seized the opportunity, slipping away into the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. She made her way to the old church in San Domenico, her senses on high alert. She saw Marco waiting for her inside, his expression grim. She told him everything, her suspicions about Marcello's involvement in her father's death, the information she had gathered, her plan for revenge. Marco listened intently, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You are your father's daughter, Alessia," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Brave, resourceful, and determined. But you are playing a dangerous game. Marcello is a formidable enemy." "I know," Alessia replied. "But I am not afraid. I will not rest until I have avenged my father." Marco nodded, his resolve hardening. "I will help you, Alessia. I will gather my men, my resources. We will bring Marcello Ricci down. We will restore the honor of the DeSantis family." Alessia felt a surge of hope, a sense of relief. She was not alone. She had an ally, a powerful ally who shared her determination, her thirst for justice. The dance of defiance had led to a glimmer of hope, a spark of rebellion that threatened to ignite a firestorm. The meeting was a turning point, a moment where Alessia felt the first shift in the balance of power. She had taken a risk, and it had paid off, but she knew the road ahead was still fraught with peril. Chapter 7. Scars of the Past, Bonds of the Present. The alliance with Uncle Marco breathed new life into Alessia's fight. She returned to the Ricci villa with a renewed sense of purpose, her actions guided by a carefully crafted strategy. The information exchange with Marco had been fruitful. He'd confirmed some of her suspicions about the night her father died, revealing a network of paid informants and a hasty cover-up orchestrated by Marcello. Alessia decided to focus on Marcello's mother, Isabella. Donatella's stories had painted a picture of a woman trapped in a gilded cage, much like Alessia herself. If she could understand Isabella's fate, she might uncover a weakness in Marcello, a vulnerability she could exploit. She began spending more time with Donatella, subtly steering their conversations towards Isabella. Donatella, initially hesitant, gradually opened up, revealing fragments of a tragic story. Isabella was different, Donatella said one afternoon, her voice wistful, her gaze lost in the past. She had a spirit, a fire, that my brother Marcello's father tried to extinguish. He wanted a trophy wife, a silent, obedient partner. But Isabella, she yearned for more. Alessia learned that Isabella had been a talented artist, a painter who had captured the beauty of the Sicilian landscape in her vibrant canvases. But Marcello's father had forbidden her to paint, considering it a frivolous pursuit, a waste of time. He had wanted her to focus on her duties as a wife, a mother, a hostess. She used to sneak out to the old abandoned watchtower on the cliffs, Donatella confided, her voice barely a whisper. She would paint there, in secret, hidden from my brother's watchful eyes. It was her sanctuary, her escape. Alessia's heart quickened with anticipation. This watchtower, it could be a key to understanding Isabella's death. The next day, Alessia feigned an interest in exploring the estate grounds, asking Marcello for permission to visit the old watchtower. He was suspicious, his eyes narrowed, but he eventually agreed, assigning 2 of his capi to accompany her as always. The watchtower was a crumbling ruin, perched precariously on the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. It was a desolate, windswept place, filled with the echoes of the past. Alessia felt a sense of unease as she entered, a feeling that she was trespassing on sacred ground. The capi remained outside, their presence a constant reminder of her captivity. Alessia explored the watchtower, her eyes scanning the crumbling walls, the debris-strewn floor. She found remnants of Isabella's presence, faded paint stains on the stone floor, a broken easel, a tattered sketchbook filled with drawings of the sea, the sky, the wildflowers that grew on the cliffs. And then she found it, a small, hidden alcove, concealed behind a loose stone. Inside, she discovered a collection of Isabella's paintings, vibrant canvases that captured the beauty of the Sicilian landscape, but also the sadness, the loneliness that had haunted her. One painting, in particular, caught Alessia's attention. It was a self-portrait of Isabella, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and despair. But it was the background of the painting that sent a shiver down Alessia's spine. It depicted the watchtower, the cliffs, the sea, and a shadowy figure lurking in the background, a figure that bore an uncanny resemblance to Marcello's father. Alessia stared at the painting, her mind racing. This was it. This was the proof she needed. Isabella hadn't died of natural causes. She had been murdered, and Marcello's father was the killer. She carefully concealed the painting, tucking it into the folds of her skirt. She had to get it to Marco, to show him the evidence she had uncovered. She left the watchtower, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had found a crack in Marcello's armor, a vulnerability she could exploit. But she knew she had to be careful. One wrong move, and she would be crushed. That evening, at dinner, Marcello was unusually attentive, his eyes lingering on her, his touch more possessive than usual. Alessia forced herself to smile, to play the role of the devoted wife, but inside, she was seething with anger and disgust. "You seem different, Alessia," Marcello said, his voice smooth and laced with suspicion. "Happier, somehow." Alessia met his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "I am simply enjoying the beauty of the estate, Marcello," she replied. "The gardens, the sea, the watchtower." Marcello's eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease in their depths. "The watchtower?" he repeated. "What did you find there?" "Nothing of interest," Alessia lied, her voice calm and even. "Just an old, crumbling ruin. A reminder of the past." Marcello seemed to relax, his suspicion momentarily allayed. But Alessia knew he was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She excused herself, claiming a headache, and retired to her room. She locked the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She pulled out the painting, staring at it once more, her mind racing. She had to get it to Marco, but how? She knew she couldn't trust Sophia with something this dangerous. She needed another way, a more secure channel of communication. She looked at the painting and decided she must act fast. She looked out of the window and she noticed something, or rather someone. It was Donatella, tending to her roses in the moonlit garden. She saw it, a chance. Alessia knew she had to act quickly before Marcello discovered her secret. The scars of the past had revealed a bond in the present, a connection between two women trapped in a world of violence and deceit. And Alessia was determined to use that bond to bring Marcello down. The night held its secrets close, and Alessia prepared for a dangerous gamble, knowing that the truth could be both a weapon and a curse. Chapter 8. Hidden Truths in Moonlit Gardens. Alessia waited until the villa was quiet, the only sounds the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore and the distant hooting of an owl. She wrapped Isabella's painting in a silk scarf, concealing it beneath her cloak. She slipped out of her room, moving silently through the darkened corridors, her senses on high alert. She made her way to the gardens, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She saw Donatella, a solitary figure amidst the moonlit roses, her silver hair gleaming in the darkness. Alessia approached her cautiously, her voice a soft whisper. "Donatella," she said, "I need your help." Donatella turned, her eyes widening in surprise. She looked at Alessia, her expression wary, but also curious. "Alessia," she replied, her voice frail but firm. "What are you doing here, at this hour?" Alessia glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "I have discovered something," she said, her voice urgent. "Something about Isabella. About her death." Donatella's eyes narrowed, her gaze intense. "What have you found?" Alessia unwrapped the painting, revealing Isabella's self-portrait, the shadowy figure lurking in the background. Donatella gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "It was him," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "My brother. He killed her. I knew it. I always knew it. Alessia nodded, her own eyes welling up. I need to get this to my uncle, she said. He can use it to expose Marcello, to bring him to justice. Donatella looked at her, her expression resolute. I will help you, Alessia, she said. I will do whatever it takes. Donatella revealed a secret passage, a hidden tunnel that led from the gardens to a small, secluded cove on the beach. It was an old smuggler's route, used centuries ago to transport contraband goods. It was a dangerous path, but it was the only way to avoid Marcello's guards. My gardener, Giovanni, Donatella said, he is a loyal man. He will take you to your uncle. He knows the way. Alessia embraced Donatella, her heart filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. You are risking everything for me. Donatella smiled, a sad, wistful smile. I am doing it for Isabella, she said. And for you. You remind me of her, Alessia. You have her spirit, her fire. Do not let them extinguish it. Alessia, guided by Giovanni, a silent, weathered man with knowing eyes, made her way through the secret passage, the darkness pressing in on her, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks echoing in her ears. It was a treacherous journey, but she pressed on, her determination fueled by her desire for justice. They reached the cove, a small, hidden inlet where a fishing boat was waiting. Giovanni helped her aboard, his expression grim. Be careful, Signora, he said, his voice low and urgent. The sea can be treacherous, just like the men you are fighting. Alessia nodded, her heart pounding. She knew the risks, but she was prepared to face them. The boat set sail, the small vessel bobbing on the waves, the moon casting a silvery path across the water. Alessia looked back at the villa, a dark silhouette against the night sky, a symbol of her captivity, her oppression. She was leaving it behind, for now, but she knew she would return. She would return to reclaim her life, to avenge her father, to bring Marcello Ricci down. The journey to Palermo was long and arduous, the sea rough and unforgiving. Alessia huddled in the small cabin, her body shivering with cold and fear, but her spirit unyielding. She clutched the painting to her chest, her fingers tracing the outlines of Isabella's face, her eyes fixed on the shadowy figure in the background. She thought of her father, of his love, his strength, his unwavering belief in justice. She thought of Isabella, of her tragic fate, her silenced voice. She thought of Uncle Marco, of his loyalty, his determination to restore the honor of the DeSantis family. And she thought of Marcello, of his cruelty, his arrogance, his insatiable hunger for power. She would not let him win. She would not let him destroy everything she held dear. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of pink and orange, Alessia saw the familiar skyline of Palermo, the city of her birth, the city where her father had ruled, the city where she would seek justice. She arrived at the docks, her legs shaky, her body exhausted, but her spirit soaring. She had made it. She had escaped Marcello's clutches, and she had brought with her the evidence that could destroy him. Marco was waiting for her, his face etched with worry, his eyes scanning the horizon. He saw her, and a wave of relief washed over his face. He rushed to embrace her, his arms holding her tight. Alessia, he said, his voice choked with emotion. You're safe. Thank God. Alessia handed him the painting, her hand trembling. This is it, Uncle Marco, she said. This is the proof. This is how we bring him down. Marco stared at the painting, his eyes widening in disbelief, his expression hardening with anger. He saw the shadowy figure, the unmistakable resemblance to Marcello's father. He saw the truth, the undeniable evidence of a crime that had been hidden for far too long. We will make him pay, Alessia, he said, his voice filled with a righteous fury. We will make them all pay. For your father, for Isabella, for all those who have suffered under the Ricci family's tyranny. Alessia felt a surge of hope, a sense of victory. The hidden truths had been revealed, the moonlit gardens had yielded their secrets, and the path to justice was finally clear. But she knew the fight was far from over. Marcello would not surrender easily. He would retaliate, with all the force and fury at his command. But Alessia was ready. She was no longer a captive, a pawn in his game. She was a warrior, a DeSantis, and she would fight for her freedom, for her family, for her future. The dawn brought with it a promise of reckoning, and Alessia embraced it, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 9. The Price of Loyalty, the Cost of Betrayal. The revelation of Isabella's painting ignited a firestorm. Marco, true to his word, mobilized his resources, calling upon loyal Cappy and allies within the DeSantis network. The evidence was undeniable, a damning indictment of Marcello's father and, by extension, Marcello himself. The carefully constructed facade of the Ricci family began to crumble. Alessia, no longer confined to the villa, moved between safe houses in Palermo, working alongside Marco, strategizing, planning their next move. She learned more about the intricacies of the mafia world, the complex web of alliances, rivalries, and codes of honor. She discovered her own strength, her ability to navigate this dangerous landscape, her unwavering determination to seek justice. But the fight was not without its costs. Marcello, enraged by Alessia's escape and the exposure of his family's secrets, retaliated with brutal force. He targeted Marco's allies, using his influence and his network of informants to disrupt their operations, intimidate their families, and even orchestrate attacks on their businesses. One evening, Alessia and Marco received devastating news. Giovanni, Donatella's loyal gardener, the man who had helped Alessia escape, had been found dead. His body, brutally tortured, had been left in a public square, a clear message from Marcello. Betrayal would not be tolerated. Alessia was heartbroken, guilt-ridden. Giovanni had risked his life for her, and he had paid the ultimate price. She felt responsible for his death, her desire for revenge now tinged with a profound sense of loss. He knew the risks, Alessia, Marco said, trying to comfort her, his own voice heavy with grief. He was a loyal man, a true DeSantis. He died honorably, fighting for what he believed in. Alessia nodded, her tears flowing freely. She knew Marco was right, but it didn't ease the pain, the crushing weight of responsibility. The attack on Giovanni forced them to be more cautious, more secretive. They moved their operations to a more secure location, a hidden underground network of tunnels and bunkers beneath the city. They tightened their security, restricting access to their inner circle, their trust eroded by the constant threat of betrayal. Alessia, despite her grief, remained focused on her goal. She knew Marcello would not stop until he had silenced her, until he had crushed the rebellion. She had to be one step ahead of him, anticipate his moves, exploit his weaknesses. She decided to focus on Marcello's business dealings, his financial empire. She knew he was involved in illegal activities, smuggling, money laundering, extortion. If she could disrupt his financial network, she could weaken his power, cripple his ability to retaliate. With the help of Sofia, who continued to provide invaluable information from within the Ricci villa, Alessia began to unravel Marcello's complex financial web. She discovered a network of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and corrupt officials who were on Marcello's payroll. She shared her findings with Marco, and together they developed a plan to expose Marcello's financial crimes, to alert the authorities, to bring his empire crashing down. But they knew it was a dangerous game. Marcello had powerful allies, connections within the government, the police, the judiciary. He could manipulate the system, silence his accusers, bury the evidence. They needed a different approach, a way to bypass Marcello's influence, to reach someone who could not be bought, someone who was beyond his reach. Alessia remembered a conversation she had had with her father years ago. He had told her about a judge, a man named Salvatore Leone, who was known for his integrity, his incorruptibility, his unwavering commitment to justice. He is a rare breed, Alessia, her father had said. A man who cannot be bought, who cannot be intimidated. He is the only one who can truly bring down the corrupt, the powerful. Alessia decided to seek out Judge Leone, to present him with the evidence she had gathered, to appeal to his sense of justice. She knew it was a long shot. Judge Leone was a recluse, a man who lived under constant threat, protected by a small army of bodyguards. He was notoriously difficult to reach, even for those within the legal system. But Alessia was determined. She had to try. She had to find a way to reach him, to convince him to listen to her, to believe her. She spent days researching Judge Leone, learning about his life, his career, his past cases. She discovered that he had a daughter, a young woman named Isabella, who had been killed in a car accident many years ago. The accident had been ruled accidental, but there were rumors, whispers of foul play. Alessia sensed a connection, a shared tragedy that might bridge the gap between them. She decided to use it to her advantage. She would appeal to Judge Leone not just as a victim of Marcello's crimes, but as a father who had lost a child, a man who understood the pain of injustice. She began crafting a letter, a carefully worded appeal that would reveal her story, her evidence, and her plea for help. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to reach a man who held the key to her future, to the fate of her family. The price of loyalty had been steep, the cost of betrayal devastating, but Alessia refused to give up. She would fight on, fueled by her grief, her anger, and her unwavering belief in justice. The night was filled with uncertainty, but Alessia held on to the hope that her plea would reach the right ears, that justice would finally prevail. Chapter 10. A Fragile Alliance, a Dangerous Game. Alessia's letter to Judge Leone was a masterpiece of persuasion, a carefully crafted blend of personal narrative, compelling evidence, and a heartfelt plea for justice. She poured her soul into the words, recounting her father's murder, her forced marriage, her escape, and her unwavering determination to bring Marcello Ricci to justice. She emphasized the connection between her story and Judge Leone's own tragedy, the loss of his daughter, Isabella, highlighting the shared pain of injustice and the need for accountability. She entrusted the letter to a trusted courier, a former police officer who had been forced into retirement due to his refusal to succumb to Marcello's corruption. The courier, a man named Lorenzo, was a friend of Marco's, a man who had witnessed firsthand the devastating impact of the Ricci family's crimes. He understood the risks, but he was committed to helping Alessia, to restoring justice to Palermo. The wait for response was agonizing. Alessia, holed up in the underground bunker with Marco and his loyal Cappy, jumped at every sound, her nerves frayed, her hope dwindling with each passing day. She knew that Judge Leone was a busy man, a man who received countless requests for help, a man who was constantly under threat. But she also knew that he was a man of integrity, a man who had dedicated his life to fighting corruption, to upholding the law. She clung to the hope that he would read her letter, that he would believe her, that he would agree to help. One evening, as Alessia and Marco were reviewing their strategy, Lorenzo returned, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I have a response," he said, his voice low and urgent. "From Judge Leone. He wants to meet you, Alessia. In person." Alessia's heart leaped with a mixture of excitement and fear. This was it. This was her chance. But it was also a dangerous gamble. Meeting Judge Leone in person would expose her to enormous risks. Marcello's informants were everywhere, and if he discovered her meeting with the judge, he would not hesitate to kill her. "He wants to meet at his private villa," Lorenzo continued. "Tomorrow night. He has arranged for secure transportation. He assures you that you will be safe." Alessia nodded, her mind racing. She had to trust Judge Leone, to believe that he would protect her. She had come too far to turn back now. "I will go," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "I will meet him." The next night, Alessia, accompanied by Lorenzo and two of Marco's most trusted Capi, embarked on a perilous journey to Judge Leone's private villa. They traveled in an unmarked car, taking a circuitous route, avoiding the main roads, their senses on high alert. The villa was located in a secluded area, high in the hills overlooking Palermo. It was a fortress, surrounded by high walls, guarded by armed security, equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance technology. Alessia was ushered into the villa, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She was led through a series of corridors, past heavily armed guards, to a large, opulent study. Judge Leone was waiting for her, a tall, imposing figure with silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and a face etched with the lines of a life spent battling injustice. He greeted her with a nod, his expression somber, but also kind. "Signora DeSantis," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I have read your letter. I am deeply moved by your story. And I am impressed by your courage." Alessia met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Judge Leone," she said. "I know you are risking a great deal." "I am risking nothing compared to what you have already risked, Signora," he replied. "I believe you. I believe your father was murdered. And I believe Marcello Ricci is responsible." Alessia felt a surge of relief, a sense of validation. She had found an ally, a powerful ally who shared her commitment to justice. She presented Judge Leone with the evidence she had gathered: Isabella's painting, Sophia's testimony, the financial records detailing Marcello's illicit activities. Judge Leone examined the evidence carefully, his eyes narrowing, his expression hardening with anger. "This is damning, Signora," he said. "This is enough to bring Marcello Ricci down. But it will not be easy. He has powerful allies, connections within the government, the police. He will fight back, with all his resources." "I know," Alessia replied. "But I am not afraid. I am prepared to fight. I will not rest until justice is served." Judge Leone nodded, his admiration for her evident. "You are a remarkable woman, Signora DeSantis," he said. "You have the spirit of your father. And you have the courage of a lioness." He outlined a plan, a strategy to expose Marcello's crimes, to bring him to trial, to ensure that he would be held accountable for his actions. It was a complex plan, involving a coordinated effort between the judiciary, the police, and a select group of trusted investigators. It would require secrecy, precision, and unwavering determination. "We must move quickly," Judge Leone said. "Marcello is a dangerous man. He will not hesitate to silence anyone who threatens him. We must strike before he has a chance to react." Alessia felt a new resolve. She decided that she must act, not just for herself, but also for others. Alessia agreed to cooperate fully, to provide any assistance she could. She knew the risks, but she was prepared to face them. She had come too far to turn back now. The meeting with Judge Leone marked a turning point in Alessia's fight. She had forged a fragile alliance, a dangerous game that could either lead to victory or to her own destruction. But she was not alone. She had Judge Leone, Marco, Lorenzo, and a growing network of allies who shared her determination, her thirst for justice. The night held its breath, the stakes higher than ever before, but Alessia faced the future with a newfound sense of hope and a steely resolve. The battle was far from over, but she had a fighting chance, a glimmer of light in the darkness. Chapter 11. Masks of Civility, Hearts of War. With Judge Leone's support, Alessia's fight entered a new phase. The plan was set in motion, a carefully orchestrated series of moves designed to expose Marcello's crimes and bring him to justice. Alessia, while remaining hidden, played a crucial role, providing information, coordinating with Marco and Lorenzo, and acting as a liaison between Judge Leone and the DeSantis network. The first step was to secure the evidence to ensure that it could not be tampered with or destroyed. Judge Leone arranged for a secure storage facility guarded by his most trusted officers, where Isabella's painting, Sophia's testimony, and the financial records were placed under lock and key. The next step was to gather additional evidence to strengthen the case against Marcello. Judge Leone assigned a team of investigators, handpicked for their integrity and their expertise, to delve deeper into Marcello's financial dealings, his connections to organized crime, and his history of violence. Alessia, working with Sophia, provided the investigators with valuable leads, insider information that helped them unravel Marcello's complex web of deceit. Sophia, risking her life, continued to gather information from within the Ricci villa, relaying messages through coded phone calls and secret meetings. Meanwhile, Marco and his capi focused on disrupting Marcello's operations, targeting his businesses, his smuggling routes, and his network of informants. They used their knowledge of the underworld, their connections within the various families, to undermine Marcello's power, to weaken his grip on Palermo. Marcello, sensing the tide turning against him, grew increasingly paranoid and ruthless. He tightened security at the villa, restricting access to his inner circle, his trust eroded by the constant threat of betrayal. He lashed out at anyone he suspected of disloyalty, his violence escalating, his desperation growing. Donatella, witnessing her nephew's descent into madness, became increasingly fearful for Alessia's safety. She knew that Marcello would stop at nothing to silence her, to prevent her from exposing his crimes. "You must be careful, Alessia," Donatella warned, her voice trembling with emotion, during one of their secret meetings in the garden. "Marcello is a dangerous man. He has no conscience, no remorse. He will kill you, without hesitation." Alessia nodded, her own fear growing, but her determination unwavering. "I know, Donatella," she replied, "but I will not be intimidated. I will not back down. I will see this through to the end." Despite the risks, Alessia insisted on maintaining contact with Sophia, recognizing the invaluable role she played in their fight. She arranged for secret meetings, using coded messages and elaborate precautions to avoid detection. One evening, Alessia received a frantic call from Sophia. "Marcello he knows," Sophia whispered, her voice choked with fear. "He knows about the judge. He knows about the evidence. He's planning something big." Alessia's heart sank. This was her worst nightmare. Marcello had discovered their plan, and he was preparing to retaliate. She immediately contacted Marco and Judge Leone, relaying Sophia's warning. They knew they had to act quickly, to preempt Marcello's attack, to protect themselves and their allies. Judge Leone issued arrest warrants for Marcello and his key associates, based on the evidence they had already gathered. He mobilized the police, preparing for a coordinated raid on the Ricci Villa and other locations where Marcello's men were known to operate. Marco and his capi prepared for a confrontation, gathering their forces, arming themselves, and preparing for a violent showdown. They knew that Marcello would not surrender peacefully. He would fight to the death, taking as many of them with him as he could. Alessia, torn between her desire to participate in the fight and her need to remain safe, was ordered by Judge Leone to stay hidden, to protect herself and the evidence. He knew that she was Marcello's primary target, and he would not risk losing her. As the night of the raid approached, Alessia felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition of violence and loss. She knew that this was the culmination of everything she had been working towards, the final confrontation between her and Marcello. But she also knew that it would come at a terrible cost. She thought of her father, of his sacrifice, of his unwavering belief in justice. She thought of Isabella, of her tragic fate, her silenced voice. She thought of Giovanni, of his loyalty, his ultimate sacrifice. And she thought of Marcello, of his cruelty, his arrogance, his insatiable hunger for power. She would not let him win. She would not let him destroy everything she held dear. She prayed for strength, for courage, for guidance. She prayed for the safety of her allies, for the success of their mission. And she prayed for justice, for a future free from the tyranny of the Ricci family. The masks of civility had been shattered, revealing the hearts of war that beat beneath. The night was filled with tension, with the anticipation of violence, with the knowledge that lives would be lost, that the fate of Palermo hung in the balance. Alessia, though hidden, was at the center of the storm, her determination the driving force behind the fight for justice. Chapter 12. Shattered Reflections, Broken Vows. The raid on the Ricci Villa was a carefully coordinated operation, a symphony of controlled chaos. Judge Leone, overseeing the operation from a secure command center, directed the police forces, ensuring that every move was precise, every precaution taken. Marco and his capi, acting as a separate but coordinated unit, targeted Marcello's known associates and hideouts throughout Palermo, disrupting his network and preventing any potential escape routes. Alessia, Confined to the underground bunker, listened to the unfolding events through a secure communication link, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She heard the sounds of gunfire, the shouts of men, the screeching of tires, the wailing of sirens. She imagined the chaos, the violence, the desperation of Marcelo and his men as they fought to resist arrest. Sophia, trapped inside the villa, risked her life to provide Alessia with real-time updates, whispering into a hidden microphone, her voice trembling with fear. "They're fighting back," Sophia whispered. "Marcelo, he's armed. He's shooting at the police. He's insane." Alessia felt a surge of fear for Sophia's safety. She knew that Marcelo would not hesitate to kill anyone who stood in his way, even a defenseless maid. "Sophia, get out of there," Alessia urged, her voice desperate. "Find a safe place. Hide. Your life is more important." "I can't," Sophia replied, her voice choked with sobs. He's looking for you. He knows you're behind this. He wants to kill you." Alessia's blood ran cold. Marcelo was hunting her, even as his world crumbled around him. He was obsessed with her, with his desire to control her, to break her. The communication link went silent, leaving Alessia in an agony of suspense. She didn't know what was happening at the villa, whether Sophia was safe, whether Marcelo was still alive. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each second filled with a growing sense of dread. Alessia paced the bunker, her hands clenched into fists, her mind racing with desperate scenarios. Finally, the communication link crackled back to life. It was Marco, his voice breathless, but filled with a sense of triumph. "Alessia," he said, "it's over. Marcelo, he's dead." Alessia felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed by a profound sense of emptiness. Marcelo was gone, the man who had murdered her father, the man who had forced her into a life of captivity, the man who had haunted her dreams. He was dead, and she should have felt joy, satisfaction, closure. But she felt only a hollow sadness, a sense of loss for the life that could have been, for the innocence that had been stolen from her. "Sophia," Alessia asked, her voice trembling. "Is she safe?" "She's alive," Marco replied. "She's shaken, but she's unharmed. She helped the police. She led them to Marcelo." Alessia closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophia, the timid maid, had become a heroine, a symbol of courage and resilience. She had risked her life to help bring down a tyrant, and she had survived. The raid had been a success, but it had come at a cost. Several police officers and some of Marco's capi had been killed or wounded. The Ricci villa was a scene of devastation, the opulent furnishings shattered, the walls riddled with bullet holes, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Alessia, escorted by Lorenzo and a contingent of police officers, returned to the villa, her heart heavy with grief and a sense of unreality. She walked through the familiar halls, now transformed into a scene of carnage, her eyes scanning the wreckage, her mind struggling to comprehend the violence that had taken place. She found Donatella in her garden, surrounded by her beloved roses, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with tears. Donatella embraced Alessia, her body trembling with emotion. "It's over, child," Donatella whispered. "It's finally over. The curse of the Ricci family, it's broken." Alessia held Donatella close, her own tears flowing freely. They had survived, but they had lost so much. The scars of the past, the wounds of the present, would take time to heal. Alessia entered the master bedroom, the room where she had spent so many nights as Marcelo's captive, the room where he had tried to break her spirit. She saw his body, lying on the floor, covered in a white sheet, his face frozen in a mask of anger and defiance. She felt no pity for him, only a profound sense of sadness for the wasted life, for the darkness that had consumed him. She had defeated him, but she had not found peace. She looked in the mirror, at her own reflection, and saw a different woman staring back at her. She was no longer the naive, sheltered girl who had been forced into a loveless marriage. She was a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had faced her demons and emerged stronger, more resilient, more determined. The shattered reflections of the past mirrored the broken vows of her marriage. Alessia had endured, had fought, had emerged victorious, but the victory was bittersweet. The night was filled with a sense of closure, but also with the heavy weight of loss and the daunting task of rebuilding shattered lives. Alessia knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was ready to face it, her spirit tempered by fire, her heart filled with a quiet strength. Chapter 13. The Unveiling of Secrets, the Weight of Truth. The aftermath of the raid was a whirlwind of activity. The media, alerted to the events at the Ricci Villa, descended upon Palermo, their headlines screaming of the downfall of a mafia empire. The public, long accustomed to the whispers of organized crime, was shocked by the scale of Marcello's crimes, the brutality of his methods, and the corruption that had allowed him to operate with impunity for so long. Judge Leone, hailed as a hero, held a press conference, promising a full investigation into the Ricci family's activities and a commitment to rooting out corruption within the government and the police force. He praised Alessia's courage, her unwavering determination to seek justice, and her invaluable contribution to the investigation. Alessia, however, remained in the shadows, avoiding the media spotlight, her privacy protected by Judge Leone and Marco. She had no desire for fame or recognition. She had simply wanted justice for her father, for Isabella, for all those who had suffered under Marcello's tyranny. The legal proceedings against Marcello's surviving associates began, a complex and lengthy process that would take months, even years, to complete. Alessia, working closely with Judge Leone and his team of investigators, provided testimony, evidence, and insights into the inner workings of the Ricci family. She learned more about the extent of Marcello's crimes, the vast network of illegal activities that had sustained his empire. She discovered that he had been involved not only in smuggling, money laundering, and extortion, but also in drug trafficking, human trafficking, and even political assassinations. The weight of these revelations was heavy, a burden that Alessia carried with her, a constant reminder of the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface of her seemingly glamorous life. One day, while reviewing the evidence with Judge Leone, Alessia stumbled upon a hidden file, a collection of documents that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. The file contained information about Marcello's mother, Isabella, and the circumstances surrounding her death. Alessia, her heart pounding with anticipation, examined the documents carefully. She discovered that Isabella had not only been a talented artist, but also a secret informant, working with a small group of anti-mafia activists to expose her husband's crimes. She had been gathering evidence, documenting his illegal activities, and preparing to testify against him. But Marcello's father had discovered her betrayal, and he had silenced her, staging her death as a car accident. Alessia felt a surge of admiration for Isabella, a woman who had risked everything to fight for justice, a woman who had been silenced before her voice could be heard. She realized that she had been following in Isabella's footsteps, fighting the same battle, seeking the same justice. She presented the file to Judge Leone, her voice filled with emotion. "This changes everything," she said. "Isabella was a hero. She deserves to be recognized for her courage, for her sacrifice." Judge Leone agreed. He ordered a new investigation into Isabella's death, reopening the case that had been closed for so many years. He vowed to bring her killer to justice, to finally clear her name and honor her memory. The unveiling of Isabella's secret life had a profound impact on Alessia. She felt a deep connection to this woman she had never met, a woman who had shared her spirit, her fire, her unwavering commitment to justice. She realized that she was not alone in her fight, that she was carrying on a legacy of resistance, a tradition of courage that had been passed down through generations. Donatella, informed of the discovery, was overwhelmed with emotion. She had always suspected that her brother had murdered Isabella, but she had never had proof. Now, the truth had finally been revealed, and she could finally mourn her sister-in-law, her friend, with a clear conscience. "She was a good woman, Alessia," Donatella said, her voice trembling with tears. "A beautiful soul. She deserved a better life, a better fate. Alessia embraced Donatella, her own tears flowing freely. They had both lost so much, but they had also found something precious, a bond of shared grief, of shared understanding, of shared determination to honor the memory of those who had been lost. The weight of the truth was heavy, but it was also liberating. Alessia had uncovered the secrets of the past, and she had brought justice to those who had been silenced for too long. She had fulfilled her vow to her father, and she had honored the legacy of Isabella. The unveiling of secrets had brought closure, but also a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to continue fighting for justice, for a future free from the darkness of the past. Alessia knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but she was no longer alone. She had allies, she had support, and she had the strength of her convictions to guide her. Chapter 14. Paths of Deception, Roads to Freedom. With Marcello gone and his empire crumbling, Alessia faced a new challenge, rebuilding her life and reclaiming her identity. She was no longer the captive bride, the pawn in a deadly game. She was a free woman, but she was also a woman scarred by trauma, burdened by loss, and uncertain of her future. She decided to leave the Ricci villa, the place that had been her prison, the place that held so many painful memories. She moved back to her family's palazzo in Palermo, the place where she had grown up, the place where she had known love and happiness. The palazzo, however, was not the same. It felt empty, haunted by the absence of her father, filled with echoes of the past. Alessia wandered through the familiar rooms, her heart aching with a sense of loss, a longing for the life that had been stolen from her. She spent hours in her father's study, surrounded by his books, his papers, his personal belongings. She touched his things, inhaled his scent, trying to conjure his presence, to feel his love, his guidance. She discovered a hidden drawer in his desk, a secret compartment that she had never known existed. Inside, she found a letter, addressed to her, written in her father's familiar handwriting. Alessia's heart pounded as she opened the letter, her hands trembling with anticipation. She read the words, her tears flowing freely, her soul aching with a mixture of grief and gratitude. Her father had known that his life was in danger, that Marcello was a threat to their family. He had written the letter as a precaution, a message to be delivered to her in the event of his death. He had apologized for forcing her into the marriage, for sacrificing her happiness for the sake of the family. He had explained his reasons, his fears, his hopes for her future. He had urged her to be strong, to be courageous, to fight for her freedom, to never give up hope. He had told her that he loved her, that he was proud of her, that he would always be with her in spirit. Alessia clutched the letter to her chest, her heart overflowing with emotion. Her father's words were a balm to her wounded soul, a source of strength, a reminder of his unwavering love. She realized that she had been living her life according to other people's expectations, fulfilling their desires, conforming to their rules. She had been a daughter, a wife, a captive, a pawn. But she had never truly been herself. She decided to change that. She decided to forge her own path, to create her own destiny, to live her life on her own terms. She started by reclaiming her education. She had always been a bright student, a lover of learning, but her studies had been interrupted by her marriage. She enrolled in university, pursuing a degree in art history, a subject that had always fascinated her. She immersed herself in her studies, finding solace in the world of art, in the beauty of the past, in the creativity of the human spirit. She discovered a passion for restoration, for preserving the cultural heritage of Sicily, for bringing beauty back to life. She also began to explore her own artistic talents. She had always been drawn to painting, but she had never had the time or the freedom to pursue it. She started taking art classes, experimenting with different techniques, expressing her emotions through color and form. She found that art was a healing force, a way to process her trauma, to express her grief, to find beauty in the midst of darkness. She painted images of her father, of Isabella, of the landscapes of Sicily, of the resilience of the human spirit. She also began to reconnect with her friends and family, the people who had been pushed aside during her captivity. She spent time with her cousins, her uncles, her aunts, rebuilding the relationships that had been strained by the conflict with the Ricci family. She found that they were supportive, understanding, and eager to help her rebuild her life. They had all suffered under Marcello's tyranny, and they were all united in their desire for a better future. Alessia even began to cautiously explore the possibility of a new relationship. She met a young architect, named Lorenzo, a different Lorenzo than Marco's friend, who was working on the restoration of a historic church in Palermo. He was kind, intelligent, and passionate about his work. He was also aware of Alessia's past, but he was not intimidated by it. He saw her for who she was, a strong, resilient, and beautiful woman. He admired her and made it clear. Alessia was hesitant at first, her heart still scarred by her experience with Marcello. But Lorenzo was patient, understanding, and respectful. He did not pressure her. He did not try to control her. He simply offered her his friendship, his companionship, his support. Gradually, Alessia began to open up to him, to share her thoughts, her feelings, her dreams. She found that she enjoyed his company, that she felt safe with him, that she could be herself around him. She realized that she was capable of love, of trust, of happiness. She had been through hell, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined to live her life to the fullest. The paths of deception she had navigated had led her to a road of freedom, a path of self-discovery, a journey of healing and renewal. Alessia was no longer a victim, a captive, a pawn. She was a survivor, a warrior, a woman who had reclaimed her life and forged her own destiny. The future was uncertain, but Alessia faced it with courage, with hope, and with a newfound sense of purpose. Chapter 15. A gathering storm, an inevitable clash. While Alessia was rebuilding her life, the remnants of Marcello's empire were not idle. Although many of his key associates had been arrested, some had managed to evade capture, fleeing to other parts of Italy or abroad. They were scattered, disorganized, but they were still dangerous, still loyal to Marcello's memory, and still fueled by a desire for revenge. One of these men, a ruthless capo named Vincenzo D'Angelo, emerged as a leader among the scattered remnants. D'Angelo had been Marcello's right-hand man, a brutal enforcer who had carried out many of Marcello's most violent orders. He was fiercely loyal to Marcello, and he blamed Alessia for his downfall. D'Angelo began to gather the remaining forces, recruiting new members, rebuilding connections, and plotting his revenge. He knew that Alessia was the key to restoring the Ricci family's power, that she was the symbol of their defeat. He vowed to hunt her down, to make her pay for what she had done. Judge Leone, aware of the threat posed by D'Angelo and his men, increased security around Alessia, assigning a team of bodyguards to protect her, monitoring her movements, and keeping her informed of any potential dangers. Alessia, however, refused to live in fear. She had spent too long hiding, too long living under the shadow of violence. She was determined to live her life openly, to pursue her studies, her art, her relationships, without being constantly afraid. She continued to attend university, to work on her restoration projects, to spend time with Lorenzo. She knew the risks, but she refused to let them control her. One evening, as Alessia was walking home from a late-night class, she was attacked. Two men, their faces concealed by masks, ambushed her in a dark alleyway, attempting to drag her into a waiting car. Alessia fought back, kicking, screaming, using the self-defense skills her father had taught her. She managed to break free from their grip, running for her life, her heart pounding in her chest. The men pursued her, their footsteps echoing in the narrow streets. Alessia, desperate, ducked into a small cafe, seeking refuge among the late-night patrons. The men, realizing they had lost their chance, fled into the darkness, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets of Palermo. Alessia, shaken but unharmed, was taken to a nearby police station, where she reported the attack. Judge Leone, informed of the incident, was furious. He ordered a city-wide manhunt for D'Angelo and his men, vowing to bring them to justice. The attack, however, had a profound impact on Alessia. She realized that she was not safe, that Marcello's legacy of violence continued to haunt her, that her freedom was still fragile. She became more cautious, more vigilant, her senses constantly on high alert. She avoided walking alone at night. She varied her routes. She kept her bodyguards close. She also began to question her relationship with Lorenzo. She cared for him deeply, but she feared that her association with him put him in danger. She didn't want him to become a target, to become another victim of Marcello's vendetta. She considered breaking up with him, distancing herself from him, for his own safety. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. She needed him, his support, his companionship, his love. Lorenzo, aware of Alessia's fears, reassured her of his commitment. He told her that he was not afraid, that he would stand by her, that he would protect her. "I love you, Alessia," he said. "And I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. We'll face this together." Alessia, touched by his words, his unwavering loyalty, felt a surge of hope, a renewed sense of determination. She would not be defeated. She would not let fear control her. She would fight for her life, for her freedom, for her future. The gathering storm of D'Angelo's revenge loomed over them, threatening to engulf them in violence and chaos. But Alessia and Lorenzo faced it together, their love a shield against the darkness, their courage a beacon of hope in the gathering gloom. An inevitable clash was brewing, a showdown between the remnants of a fallen empire and the forces of justice, a battle that would determine the fate of Alessia and the future of Palermo. Chapter 16. Echoes of Thunder, Whispers of Fear. The manhunt for Vincenzo D'Angelo intensified, with police forces across Italy and Europe cooperating to track down the fugitive capo and his men. Judge Leone, determined to prevent another attack on Alessia, tightened security even further, assigning a 24-hour guard detail and restricting her movements to a small, secure area. Alessia, feeling increasingly like a prisoner in her own city, chafed under the restrictions. She understood the need for caution, but she longed for the freedom she had fought so hard to regain. She missed her classes, her work, her walks with Lorenzo. Lorenzo, sensing Alessia's frustration, did his best to keep her spirits up, visiting her regularly, bringing her books, art supplies, and news of the outside world. He reassured her that the restrictions were temporary, that D'Angelo would be caught, that they would soon be able to resume their lives. One evening, as Lorenzo was leaving Alessia's safe house, he was followed. A black car, its windows tinted, tailed him through the streets of Palermo, its occupants watching his every move. Lorenzo, realizing he was being followed, tried to lose the car, taking a series of detours, weaving through the narrow streets, his heart pounding with fear. But the car remained on his tail, its presence a menacing shadow. He managed to reach his apartment building, dashing inside, locking the door behind him. He looked out the window, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and saw the black car parked across the street, its occupants waiting, watching. He knew he was in danger, that D'Angelo's men had found him. He immediately called Alessia, warning her of the threat. "Alessia," he said, his voice urgent. "They're after me. They know about us. You need to be careful. Stay hidden. Don't trust anyone." Alessia's heart sank. This was her worst fear. D'Angelo was targeting Lorenzo, using him to get to her. She immediately contacted Judge Leone, relaying Lorenzo's message. The judge, furious, ordered an immediate increase in security around Lorenzo, dispatching a team of officers to his apartment to protect him. He also ordered a renewed effort to locate D'Angelo, realizing that the fugitive capo was becoming increasingly desperate and dangerous. Alessia, unable to sit idly by while Lorenzo was in danger, defied Judge Leone's orders and left the safe house, determined to reach Lorenzo and help him. She knew it was a reckless decision, that she was putting herself at risk, but she couldn't bear the thought of Lorenzo being harmed because of her. She took a taxi, avoiding the main roads, her senses on high alert. She arrived at Lorenzo's apartment building, her heart pounding with fear, and saw the police cars surrounding the building, the officers questioning the residents, the air thick with tension. She slipped past the police cordon, making her way to Lorenzo's apartment. She found him inside, shaken but unharmed, surrounded by police officers. He saw her, and a wave of relief washed over his face. He rushed to embrace her, holding her tight, his body trembling. "Alessia," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous." "I couldn't stay away," she replied, her own tears flowing freely. "I had to make sure you were safe." The police officers, recognizing Alessia, informed her that they had found evidence that D'Angelo's men had been planning to kidnap Lorenzo, to use him as bait to lure Alessia into a trap. Alessia felt a surge of anger, of hatred for D'Angelo, for the violence he had unleashed, for the fear he had instilled. She vowed to make him pay, to bring him to justice, to end his reign of terror. The echoes of thunder from a distant storm mirrored the turmoil within Alessia's heart, the whispers of fear a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them. But amidst the chaos, the love between Alessia and Lorenzo shone brightly, a beacon of hope in the darkness, a testament to their resilience, their courage, and their unwavering commitment to each other. They knew the fight was far from over, that D'Angelo was still out there, plotting his revenge. But they were prepared to face him, together, their love a shield against the storm, their determination a force that could not be broken. Chapter 17. The Crucible of Pain, the Forge of Strength. Judge Leone, realizing that D'Angelo was becoming increasingly unpredictable and dangerous, decided to take a more aggressive approach. He authorized a series of raids on known mafia hideouts, safe houses, and businesses, hoping to flush D'Angelo out of hiding and disrupt his operations. The raids were successful in capturing several of D'Angelo's key associates, seizing weapons, drugs, and cash, and gathering valuable intelligence. But D'Angelo himself remained elusive, slipping through the police net, his whereabouts unknown. Alessia, frustrated by the lack of progress, decided to take matters into her own hands. She knew that she was D'Angelo's primary target, that he would stop at nothing to get to her. She decided to use herself as bait, to lure him into a trap. She contacted Marco, sharing her plan with him. Marco, initially reluctant, argued that it was too dangerous, that she was risking her life. But Alessia was adamant. She was tired of hiding, tired of living in fear. She wanted to end this, once and for all. Marco, reluctantly agreeing, helped Alessia devise a plan. They would use the upcoming annual feast of St. Rosalia, a major religious festival in Palermo, as the setting for their trap. The festival would draw large crowds, providing cover for their operation and making it difficult for D'Angelo to escape. Alessia, with Marco's help, spread rumors that she would be attending the festival, making a public appearance at the main procession, defying D'Angelo's threats. She knew that D'Angelo, obsessed with her, would not be able to resist the opportunity to confront her. Judge Leone, informed of Alessia's plan, was furious. He ordered her to abandon the idea, arguing that it was too reckless, that she was playing into D'Angelo's hands. But Alessia was resolute. She had made up her mind, and she would not back down. On the day of the festival, Alessia, disguised in a simple dress and a headscarf, joined the crowds gathered in the streets of Palermo. She was surrounded by a team of undercover police officers, their presence concealed among the throngs of revelers. Marco and his capi, also disguised, were stationed at strategic points along the procession route, ready to intervene at a moment's notice. Alessia, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation, walked through the crowded streets, her eyes scanning the faces around her, searching for any sign of D'Angelo. The air was thick with the scent of incense, the sounds of music and laughter, the energy of the festival. As the procession reached the main square, Alessia saw him. D'Angelo, his face contorted with hatred, was pushing his way through the crowd, his eyes fixed on her. He was armed, a pistol concealed beneath his jacket. Alessia felt a surge of fear, but she stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. She had come this far, and she would not back down. D'Angelo, reaching Alessia, drew his pistol, aiming it at her heart. The crowd, realizing what was happening, screamed, scattering in panic. Before D'Angelo could fire, Marco and his Cappy intervened, tackling him to the ground, disarming him. The undercover police officers moved in, arresting D'Angelo and his accomplices who had been waiting in the crowd to provide support. The scene was chaotic, a flurry of violence and confusion. Alessia, shaken but unharmed, watched as D'Angelo was dragged away, his face filled with rage and defeat. The crucible of pain had tested Alessia's strength, her courage, her resolve. She had faced her enemy, and she had emerged victorious. But the victory was not without its scars. The fear, the violence, the constant threat had taken its toll. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Alessia was hailed as a hero, her bravery praised by the media, the public, and Judge Leone himself. But Alessia shunned the attention, retreating into the quiet solitude of her home, seeking solace in her art, in her studies, in her relationship with Lorenzo. She had survived, but she had also been changed. The experience had forged her into a stronger, more resilient woman, a woman who had faced her demons and emerged victorious. But it had also left her with a profound sense of sadness, a realization of the darkness that lurked within the human heart, the fragility of life, and the enduring power of love and loyalty. The forge of strength had shaped her, but it had also left its mark, a reminder of the battles fought and the sacrifices made. Alessia knew that the healing process would be long and arduous, but she was determined to move forward, to embrace the future, to live her life to the fullest, in honor of those who had been lost and in defiance of those who had sought to destroy her. Chapter 18. Flames of Resistance, Ashes of Regret. With D'Angelo's capture, the immediate threat to Alessia's life subsided, but the embers of the conflict still smoldered. The legal proceedings against D'Angelo and his associates began, a lengthy and complex process that dragged Alessia back into the heart of the mafia world she had hoped to leave behind. She testified against D'Angelo, recounting her experiences, her voice strong and clear, her gaze unwavering. She described the attack in the alleyway, the threats against Lorenzo, the attempted kidnapping, and D'Angelo's obsession with her. D'Angelo, facing overwhelming evidence and multiple charges, including attempted murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy, pleaded guilty, hoping to receive a lighter sentence. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Alessia, attending the sentencing, felt a sense of closure, but not of triumph. She had brought D'Angelo to justice, but she could not bring back the lives that had been lost, the innocence that had been shattered. She visited Donatella, who was ailing, frail, and grief-stricken with the news. Donatella had always disliked D'Angelo. He was a bad seed, she wheezed. Marcello, he let himself be consumed by power. It's better this way, Alessia. Alessia nodded, a lump building in her throat. After the sentencing, Alessia decided to take a step back from the spotlight, to focus on her healing, her studies, and her relationship with Lorenzo. She moved out of the palazzo, finding it too filled with painful memories, and moved into a small apartment overlooking the sea, a place where she could start anew. She continued to pursue her degree in art history, immersing herself in her studies, finding solace in the beauty of the past. She also continued to paint, her art becoming a powerful form of self-expression, a way to process her trauma, to express her emotions, to find beauty in the midst of darkness. She and Lorenzo grew closer, their love deepening, their bond strengthened by the shared experiences, the dangers they had faced together. They spent hours walking along the beach, talking, laughing, dreaming of a future free from fear and violence. Lorenzo proposed to Alessia on a moonlit night on the same beach where they had shared their first kiss. Alessia, her heart overflowing with love, accepted his proposal, her tears of joy mingling with the salty spray of the sea. They planned a small, intimate wedding, surrounded by their closest friends and family, a celebration of their love, their resilience, their triumph over adversity. But as the wedding day approached, Alessia felt a growing sense of unease, a lingering shadow of the past. She had nightmares, reliving the trauma of her captivity, the violence of the raids, the constant threat of danger. She realized that she could not fully move on, that she could not truly embrace the future until she had confronted the ghosts of her past, until she had made peace with her memories. She decided to visit the Ricci Villa, the place where she had spent so many months as Marcello's captive, the place that held so many painful memories. She went alone, without telling Lorenzo or anyone else. She needed to face this on her own, to confront her demons, to find a way to heal. The villa was empty, abandoned, its opulent furnishings gathering dust, its walls echoing with the silence of the past. Alessia wandered through the familiar rooms, her heart aching with a sense of loss, a longing for the life that could have been. She visited her old room, the place where she had spent so many nights in fear, in despair, in defiance. She looked out the window, at the sea, the same view that had once offered her a glimpse of hope, a promise of escape. She visited the library, where she had discovered the hidden compartment, the secrets of the Ricci family, the truth about Isabella's death. She touched the books, the furniture, the objects that had witnessed so much pain, so much violence. She visited the gardens, where she had found solace in Donatella's company, where she had plotted her escape, where she had found a glimmer of hope. And finally, she visited the master bedroom, the room where Marcello had died, the room where her captivity had ended. She stood there, in silence, her eyes scanning the empty space, her mind replaying the events of that fateful night. She felt a surge of anger, of grief, of regret. She had survived, but she had also lost so much. She had been robbed of her innocence, her freedom, her peace of mind. But as she stood there, in the heart of her former prison, she also felt a sense of strength, of resilience, of gratitude. She had faced her demons, and she had emerged victorious. She had broken free from her captivity. She had found love. She had reclaimed her life. The flames of resistance had burned brightly, consuming the darkness of the past, leaving behind the ashes of regret. Alessia had emerged from the fire, scarred but not broken, her spirit tempered by adversity, her heart filled with a quiet strength. She was ready to move on, to embrace the future, to live her life to the fullest, in honor of those who had been lost and in defiance of those who had sought to destroy her. Chapter 19. A desperate plea, a final stand. Despite D'Angelo's imprisonment, a lingering unease persisted. Alessia, though trying to move forward, found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, the echoes of the past refusing to fade completely. Judge Leone, aware of this, maintained a discreet security presence around her, a silent assurance that she was not forgotten. One afternoon, Alessia received an unexpected visitor. It was Sophia, the former maid from the Ricci Villa, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Signora Alessia," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "I need your help. It's about Donatella." Alessia's heart sank. Donatella, frail and elderly, had been a source of comfort and strength during her captivity. She had hoped that the old woman could finally find some peace after Marcello's death and D'Angelo's capture. "What is it, Sophia?" Alessia asked, her voice filled with concern. "What's happened?" Sophia explained that Donatella had fallen seriously ill, her health rapidly deteriorating. She had been taken to a private clinic, but the doctors were not hopeful. Donatella had expressed a wish to see Alessia, one last time. She keeps asking for you," Sophia said, her tears flowing freely. "She says you're the only one she trusts. She has something important to tell you." Alessia, despite her own fears and anxieties, did not hesitate. She agreed to accompany Sophia to the clinic, her heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. The clinic was a small, discreet facility, tucked away in a quiet corner of Palermo. Alessia was ushered into Donatella's room, a sterile, dimly lit space filled with the beeping of medical equipment. Donatella lay in the bed, her body frail and emaciated, her breathing shallow and labored. Her eyes, once bright and filled with a spark of defiance, were now dull and clouded with pain. Alessia approached the bed, taking Donatella's hand in hers. The old woman's grip was weak, her skin cold and clammy. "Alessia," Donatella whispered, her voice barely audible. "You came, of course, Donatella," Alessia replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm here." Donatella struggled to speak, her words fragmented and disjointed. "The villa," she whispered. "There's something hidden, something Marcello wanted." Alessia leaned closer, straining to hear Donatella's words. She realized that the old woman was trying to tell her something important, something related to Marcello, something that had been hidden at the villa. "What is it, Donatella?" Alessia asked, her voice urgent. "What's hidden at the villa?" Donatella's eyes flickered with a spark of urgency. "The chapel," she whispered. "Behind the altar, a secret compartment." Alessia's mind raced. The chapel at the villa, she remembered the small, secluded space, the place where she had prayed for strength, for guidance. She had never noticed anything unusual, any sign of a hidden compartment. "What's in the compartment, Donatella?" Alessia asked, her voice desperate. "What did Marcello hide there?" Donatella struggled to speak, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Documents," she whispered. "Names, allies, corruption, a final stand." Alessia understood. Marcello, anticipating his downfall, had hidden a cache of documents at the villa, documents that contained the names of his allies, his accomplices, the evidence of his corruption. He had planned a final stand, a last-ditch effort to reclaim his power, to bring down those who had betrayed him. Donatella's grip on Alessia's hand tightened, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "You must find them," she whispered. "Before they do," Alessia nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. "I will, Donatella," she promised. "I will find the documents. I will expose them all." Donatella's eyes closed, her breathing slowing, her body relaxing. A faint smile touched her lips, a sign of peace, of release. She had passed her burden to Alessia, her final wish entrusted to the woman who had become her friend, her confidant, her ally. Alessia remained by Donatella's side, holding her hand, until the old woman drew her last breath. She felt a profound sense of sadness, of loss, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Donatella's dying plea had given her a new mission, a final task to complete. She would find the documents, she would expose Marcello's remaining allies, and she would ensure that his legacy of violence and corruption would finally be extinguished. The final stand had begun, not as Marcello had intended, but as a desperate plea from a dying woman, a testament to the enduring power of truth and justice. Alessia knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, but she was prepared to face it, armed with Donatella's secret and fueled by her own unwavering determination. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Hearts, the Dawn of Choice. Alessia, honoring Donatella's dying wish, returned to the Ricci Villa, the place that held so many painful memories, now a silent testament to a fallen empire. She was accompanied by Lorenzo and Marco, their presence a source of strength and support. Judge Leone, informed of Donatella's revelation, had provided them with a search warrant and a team of forensic experts to assist in locating the hidden compartment. The villa felt different now, devoid of the menacing presence of Marcello and his men. It was a shell of its former self, the opulent furnishings covered in dust sheets, the air thick with the scent of decay and abandonment. They made their way to the small, secluded chapel, the place where Alessia had once sought solace, the place where Donatella had found a connection to the past. The chapel was dimly lit, the stained glass windows casting colored shadows on the stone floor. Alessia approached the altar, her heart pounding with anticipation. She remembered Donatella's words. Behind the altar, a secret compartment. She ran her hands along the cold, smooth surface of the altar, searching for any sign of a hidden mechanism, a loose panel, a secret latch. Lorenzo and Marco, working alongside her, examined the walls, the floor, the surrounding fixtures. After what seemed like an eternity, Lorenzo found it. A small, almost invisible button, concealed beneath a carved wooden rosette on the side of the altar. He pressed the button, and a section of the altar slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment, they found a collection of documents, neatly organized and bound in leather folders. Alessia carefully removed the documents, her hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They spread the documents out on a table, their contents revealing a shocking network of corruption and power. There were names of politicians, judges, police officers, business leaders, all of whom had been on Marcelo's payroll, all of whom had benefited from his illegal activities. There were details of bribes, payoffs, blackmail schemes, and even evidence of involvement in other crimes, including murder. Alessia felt a surge of anger, of disgust, at the scale of the corruption, the depth of the betrayal. Marcelo's influence had reached far beyond the confines of the mafia, permeating the very fabric of Sicilian society. Marco, recognizing some of the names on the list, was visibly shaken. "These are powerful people, Alessia," he said, his voice grave. "This could bring down the entire government." Lorenzo, examining the documents, discovered a detailed plan for a coordinated attack on Judge Leone, Alessia, and other key figures involved in the investigation. Marcelo, anticipating his downfall, had planned a final, desperate act of revenge, a violent assault designed to silence his enemies and reclaim his power. Alessia realized that Donatella's dying plea had not only exposed a network of corruption, but it had also prevented a potentially devastating attack. She had saved their lives, even in her final moments. They immediately contacted Judge Leone, informing him of their discovery. The judge, shocked and outraged, ordered the immediate arrest of all those implicated in the documents. He launched a full-scale investigation into the network of corruption, promising to root out the guilty and bring them to justice. The arrests that followed sent shockwaves through Palermo and beyond. Powerful figures, long considered untouchable, were brought down, their careers ruined, their reputations shattered. The public, outraged by the scale of the corruption, demanded accountability, demanding an end to the culture of impunity that had allowed the mafia to flourish for so long. Alessia, watching the events unfold, felt a sense of closure, of satisfaction, but also of sadness. She had fulfilled Donatella's dying wish. She had exposed the truth. She had brought justice to those who had been wronged. But she had also witnessed the dark underbelly of her society, the pervasive corruption that had poisoned the lives of so many. She and Lorenzo, their love strengthened by the shared experiences, the dangers they had faced together, finally celebrated their wedding. It was a small, intimate ceremony, held in a beautiful garden overlooking the sea, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Alessia, wearing a simple white dress, her face radiant with happiness, walked down the aisle, her arm linked with Marco's. She saw Lorenzo waiting for her at the altar, his eyes filled with love and admiration. They exchanged their vows, their voices filled with emotion, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. They had survived the storm, they had overcome the darkness, and they had found their way to each other. The reckoning of hearts had been long and arduous, a journey filled with pain, loss, and sacrifice. But it had also been a journey of courage, resilience, and love. Alessia had made her choice. She had chosen to fight for justice, to reclaim her life, to embrace the future. And in doing so, she had found her own happiness, her own peace, her own freedom. The dawn of a new era had arrived, an era of hope, of healing, of renewal. Alessia, standing hand in hand with Lorenzo, looked out at the same sea that had once symbolized her captivity, now a symbol of her liberation, her future, her endless possibilities. Epilogue. Years passed. The scars of the past remained, a permanent reminder of the battles fought, the sacrifices made. But Alessia had built a life filled with love, purpose, and a quiet strength that radiated from within. She and Lorenzo had children, a son and a daughter, whom they named Antonio and Isabella, in honor of those who had been lost. They raised their children in a world free from the immediate shadow of the mafia, a world where justice and honesty were valued, where the lessons of the past were not forgotten. Alessia continued her work in art restoration, her passion for preserving the cultural heritage of Sicily a testament to her resilience and her commitment to beauty. She became renowned for her skill, her dedication, her ability to bring life back to faded masterpieces. Lorenzo, his architectural practice flourishing, designed and built a new community center in Palermo, a place where people could gather, learn, and connect, a symbol of hope and renewal for the city. Marco, having retired from his former life, dedicated himself to mentoring young people, guiding them away from the temptations of organized crime, teaching them the values of integrity, hard work, and respect for the law. Judge Leone, having overseen the successful prosecution of countless corrupt officials and mafia members, retired from the bench, his legacy as a champion of justice secure. He remained a close friend and mentor to Alessia, a constant source of wisdom and support. Sophia, having testified against D'Angelo and his associates, found a new life and new purpose. She used her settlement to study and eventually open a small flower shop. She never had children, but she found fulfillment in her work. The Ricci Villa, once a symbol of power and oppression, was eventually sold and transformed into a museum, a place where the history of the mafia, its victims, and its conquerors could be remembered and understood. Alessia, though initially reluctant, eventually agreed to serve on the museum's advisory board, ensuring that the stories of those who had suffered under the Ricci family's tyranny would never be forgotten. One sunny afternoon, Alessia and Lorenzo, their hair now streaked with silver, their faces etched with the lines of time and experience, walked hand in hand along the beach, the same beach where they had shared their first kiss, the same beach where Lorenzo had proposed. Their children, now grown, were pursuing their own dreams, their own passions, their own lives. Alessia felt a profound sense of gratitude, of peace, of contentment. She looked out at the sea, the vast expanse of blue stretching out to the horizon, a symbol of endless possibilities, of freedom, of hope. She had come full circle, from captive bride to liberated woman, from victim to survivor, from pawn to queen. She had faced her demons, she had overcome adversity, she had found love, she had built a life filled with meaning and purpose. She had honored the memory of those who had been lost, and she had created a better future for those who would come after her. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and purple. Alessia and Lorenzo stood in silence, their hands clasped tightly together, their hearts filled with a quiet joy, a deep and abiding love that had weathered the storms of life and emerged stronger, more resilient, more enduring. The reckoning had been long and arduous, but it had led to a new dawn, a new beginning, a new chapter in the story of Alessia DeSantis, a woman who had dared to defy the darkness and embrace the light. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Alessia knew that her journey, though filled with challenges, had been worth it. She had found her peace, her purpose, her freedom. And she had found it, ultimately, within herself. The end.